good morning to you.
Okay. Yeah, well,
Go right ahead. You on the air.
okay. All right. Good afternoon, listeners. You're locked into WVOE, the voice of Ebony, where your health is our heartbeat. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Brown, president and founder of Pressure MD Academy, welcoming you to another enriching session of Health Facts, the show where wisdom meets wellness and knowledge is always in season. All right. We're getting ready for another one of these shows here. So, so this today is going to be part two. Okay, so we talked a little bit about part one was last week, where we're sitting around talking about why some of these chronic diseases are affecting us. Basically we're trying to talk a little bit more about those silent killers, high blood pressure and diabetes, and why these things are still catching people off guard. So last week we talked a little bit about some of the numbers that are behind this, some of the reasons, some of the rationale behind why people are still catching these diseases, and gave some insight into why there's a discrepancy, especially amongst African Americans. Okay, so that was last week. So this week we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about fighting back. So the silent killers coming in. Now it's time to throw a right uppercut and fight back a little bit. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to do, some practical steps, some very practical steps about how to protect your heart, your kidneys, and really your future is really what this is. I mean, because when we talk about these chronic diseases, these are things that we talk in the present tense, but really the present tense actually affects the future. Okay, because what you do today really, really, really does impact what happens to you in the future, your future self. Yet again, I'm a kidney and hypertension specialist, and sometimes people come into the office and, sometimes, I mean, like yet again, kind of like we said last week, sometimes people are just, kind of wondering like, why am I taking these medications? I don't feel anything. I feel fine. And I have to explain to them like, hey, look, the difference in your kidneys are affected, and the difference in being on dialysis in 5 years versus 15 years can be, from the actions you take today. So you're fighting a battle in the future. And so, what we want to talk about today are some of the practical steps, you can do to kind of protect, your kidneys, protect your heart, really protect your body, right? And kind of protect your future well self, okay? Because that's what we want to do. We want to make you as well as possible for as long as possible. And so those are things we're getting into. And one of the things about this show that at least I hope we're doing, and that is providing you with a way to approach a practical way to kind of approach a lot of these diseases. So if you notice, we don't go, I might provide us a few details, maybe a few statistics, but we try to, provide things on a level that everyone can understand, and to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so that's where some of the stuff comes from, because sometimes the change is not simply, getting a piece of information. Sometimes it's about, changing the way you look at it, how kind of how you frame your health, or kind of how how you look into things. And sometimes that's what has to be affected in order for you to see yourself in a better light in a few years, if that makes sense. It's kind of a different approach of health education, and making sure that people are learning things in a way that they can actually use them. Okay. And yeah, I'm going to put this on mute. There we go. There we go. Do not disturb. Good. Good. So, all right. So, okay. So, like I said, last week we talked a little bit about, the diseases themselves, went to a little bit about the statistics. And today we're going to talk more about, how do you empower yourself? How do you empower yourself to tackle these diseases? Okay, because like I said, knowledge, you can have the knowledge, but if you don't combine that with action, you don't really change the outcome. Okay, so you can know something, but if you don't act on what you know, it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't do anything, right? So, so we want to talk about power and how you get that power. It's kind of like, yeah, yet again, faith without works. If you got the faith and you don't do the work, I mean, where are you gonna be? You're gonna be in the same place, right? So yeah, so we want to talk about ways to approach these health conditions in a manner that it can be meaningful and that can affect your outcomes. Okay. And so, so yet again, knowledge, action, and a lot of times this comes through small consistent steps. Okay. Small, consistent steps. A lot of times people think that they have to do, like I said, say it's exercise, you need to run a mile in, 7 minutes or whatever, whatever the numbers are, right? Right. But not understanding that, walking a mile, but walking a mile consistently can be as effective, if not more effective, than trying to run a mile and you can run a mile a day and you don't run a mile for 2 weeks, right? So small, consistent steps can be very impactful in changing your health. And so we want to make sure that we talk about ways to do that. Okay. So, in terms of things you can do to kind of empower yourself to get you, yeah, to not only get the knowledge, but also to start taking the action. One thing you going to want to do is to know your numbers. Okay. So, and I think, you'll probably hear about this from different, whether it's health fairs or health gurus. I think everyone's going to talk about the same thing. And that is to know your numbers. And the reason why you need to know your numbers is because that's kind of a first step in getting the knowledge that you need to make effective change. Okay. And so what are some of the numbers? I mean, like, and I'm gonna just go over a few of these, right? Because really you're going to get all, most of your numbers from going to get your physical. But some of the things you should know, like blood pressure is just one that you really should know. So you should know what your last blood pressure was whenever you were in a medical establishment, whenever you were in a health fair. Preferably if we're at home, if you have a blood pressure machine at home, put that around your arm and see what your blood pressure is. So you're going to want to know your blood pressure. You're going to want to know your blood sugar. And for those people that have a diagnosis of pre-diabetes or diabetes, the number that you're going to want to know, what if someone that if you went to a clinic, if you went to a medical practice and someone examined you and it came back at the end and they tell you that you got either pre-diabetes or they tell you got diabetes, the number that they should tell you is something called a hemoglobin A1C. And if they don't tell you, something about hemoglobin A1C, and if they don't tell you, mention the word, they also need to mention, what the number is beside the word. Okay, hemoglobin A1C is this, and then tell you at least a little bit. And I understand, sometimes folks are busy. Sometimes you got other things. Hey, you came in for stubbing your knee, and that's got to be addressed. But if you get a diagnosis of pre-diabetes or diabetes, someone in that clinic need to be telling you what a hemoglobin A1C is, what your number is, and how those things relate to your health. Okay. That is because if there's one thing that I really just that really kind of burns me is for somebody to have diabetes for several years and not know, first of all, not know their hemoglobin A1C, but really not have an understanding of the importance of the hemoglobin A1C and taking care of their diabetes. Okay. So that's one thing that I'd really want you to know. So know your numbers. So know your blood pressure number, know your blood sugar if you're just getting screened. And if you have pre-diabetes or diabetes, make sure that you know your hemoglobin A1C. So make sure to do it. The other thing is your weight, and probably just as important is the thing called BMI, okay, body mass index. And don't get me wrong, body mass index is not the most perfect way to kind of assess, yeah, whether you're at a healthy weight, but it's a pretty good guide, and it's actually what's used in a lot of research in terms of whether or not you're at a healthy weight. So they're looking for the people that have heart attack versus people that don't have heart attacks, people that have diabetes versus people that don't have diabetes. One of the things they look at is BMI. So yes, like I said, you might have more muscle mass than adipose, and there are certain tests you can do to kind of get a sense of whether or not this is you have more, fat weight versus muscle weight. But for the most part, like I said, if you got a BMI and that BMI is elevated at a unhealthy level, then like I said, that needs, somebody needs to be telling you what it is, what your BMI is and telling you how that relates to your health. Okay. So if they tell you that you're overweight, if you tell you're obese, understand where that comes from, what that BMI is, and what you can do to kind of get it to a healthier level. Okay. So blood pressure, we talked about hemoglobin A1C, talk about your weight or your BMI. And then, of course, I'm a kidney doctor, right? So I got to tell you, you need to know your kidney numbers. You got to know your kidney numbers. And what do you want to know about your kidneys? Okay, so there are actually two things that you need to know about your kidneys. And this is for anybody that has a diagnosis of like hypertension, if you have a diagnosis of diabetes, if you have a family history of kidney injuries, like family members that had kidney injuries, or maybe they were on dialysis. Those people, you really, really, really got to pay attention to what your kidney numbers are. Kidney numbers are, and you want to know the urine albumin to creatinine ratio. Okay, that's a word you're going to listen for. It's albumin to creatinine ratio, and that's because there's a substance called albumin, and we'll in the future we'll talk about kind of the specifics about this, but albumin to creatinine ratio, and that's going to tell you whether or not there's signs of injury to the kidney. Okay, that's going to be a sign, and then there's something called an EGFR. And that EGFR is, well, I tell people to think of it as a kidney number, and it kind of tells you how much kidney function you have remaining. Okay, so that's the way to think about that. So you're gonna want to know your kidney numbers, and you're gonna want the blood, the one that comes out of the blood, and then the one that comes out of the urine. Okay, so blood pressure, hemoglobin A1C, BMI, your kidney numbers. Those are some numbers you're going to want to know. That's kind of where you can start at, right? And these are not numbers you have to necessarily memorize. Now, of course, I do. Although if you have diabetes, you have a hemoglobin A1C, you're probably going to want to remember those. And if you have a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease, you're probably going to want to keep up with your EGFR. Those things are going to, going to be very, very helpful for you. So, but what you can do, you can write them down. You don't have to, if you say, hey, don't want to keep that number in my head, you can write them down. And a lot of people have these smartphones. And if you have a smartphone, there's usually a memo in all of them. And if you have a memo application, you can put those numbers in there. Okay. Now, a lot of clinics will have also like an app where you can get a lot of your data as well. But like I said, if you have a note section, you can always use that to kind of record your numbers. Okay. All righty. So, oh, all right. I like that. I like that. So let's talk about, so we talked about the step one, know your numbers. And actually, maybe I should have flipped this, but and because step two is build a relationship with a clinician. And kind of the reason, I guess, yeah, you can kind of interchange those because, again, we're going to encourage you to get your primary care clinician, but you can get some of those numbers from different places. Like I said, they're like health fairs, or a lot of places have health fairs, and so you can get your numbers from the health fair, and just write them down and then go find your clinician. But that's one thing you do. But I do encourage people to get in a relationship with a clinician while you're quote unquote fine. Okay. Because if you don't have one and you didn't get your numbers, you don't even know if you're fine, right? Everybody loves, I've had people in the office like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine. I'm good. I'm just here because somebody told me to be here. And then you start getting blood work and you start doing some measurements and listening to people. I don't think that works for you, right? So you find things, right? Because that's what we do. 4 years of med school, lots of training to find if there's anything that might be off, so that we can treat it earlier rather than later. So make sure that you build a relationship with a clinician. Get a primary care clinician before you need one, before you need a doctor. Okay, before you think you need a doctor, you want to get your primary care clinician, and now that could be, your primary care doctor. Okay, primary care doctor. It could be a nurse, a nurse practitioner. There are physician assistants that are out there. There's some clinics that, like a free clinic or something of that nature that can kind of help you with things as well. But you want to make sure that you got somebody that kind of knows your story, can explain things clearly, kind of respects you, and you are part, your culture is part of you. So make sure that they know your culture, what your priorities are. Like I said, that's another thing that's there, and it really helps you to prevent. not just react to things. Like I said, talks to you a little bit about, how to prevent, developing, if you don't have chronic diseases, how to prevent developing chronic diseases. And as you get older, falls and injuries are common with older people. So you want somebody that's going to talk to you before you get to that age. That's going to tell you, hey, when you're 40, hey, you need to make sure I know you feel good and your numbers are okay, but you really need to be exercising and working out because you want to build that muscle mass up before you get old, okay? So that you can have some reserve as you get older. And it's not just muscle mass, it's also kind of help to strengthen the bones. So you want to make sure you're doing those things earlier, and you want somebody that's going to tell you to do that every time you come in, okay? So we want to make sure that that happens, right? Build a relationship with a clinician, and like I said, and do so before you get sick, or before you're before you are not well. So make sure you get that stuff done early, okay? And yet again, and try to see them, on a regular basis, once a year, once every other year. If you don't have any issues, might be okay. But like I said, talk to them about that before you do that, and make sure that they have some time. Like I said, sometimes it might be one that you really like, but they may get to the point they don't have time, or they may have to relocate or something of nature. So you want to do that stuff earlier, okay? All right. Talked about step one. We talked about step two. And now we want to talk about step three. And this one is, I got another certification. I'm certified in lifestyle medicine. I went and got a certificate. I already got, like, what? I got a bachelor's degree. I got a medical degree. I'm a master's in public health, FACP, FASN, the whole nine yards. I went back and got another one. And it's a certification in lifestyle medicine. And the reason I did that is because lifestyle is a treatment. It's a treatment. It's not extra credit. It's not something to do on the side. It's not a side dish. It's a treatment for a lot of our chronic conditions. A lot of times, we and I will tell you, okay, as clinician, as a physician, a lot of times you're busy, you talk about things and you kind of mention it, and then you kind of move on. But not only is the research showing lifestyle medicine is important, but, like, as honestly, as I get older, I realize how important it is to my life, and so therefore it's making me a lot more empathetic with people the people and patients that I talk to, right? So, but one of the things that get in your head is that lifestyle treatment is not. So when your doc says, "Hey, you need to walk," you need to walk. It's the same as taking your medication. Okay. So that walk is the same as taking your pills. That eat fresh fruits and vegetable is the same thing as, your insulin injection or whatever it is, right? It's kind of it's like your chemo, chemo for chronic diseases, right? Is how, is exercising properly, eating properly, getting some rest, lowering your stress. All those things kind of go into, what we call lifestyle medicine, lifestyle treatment. And it is a treatment. It is a treatment. It is a treatment, especially in today's age. Now, back in the day, you used to get a lot of lifestyle stuff anyway. You talk to your grandpa, grandma, and they, the way they lived life. And I think we touched on that before as well. The way they lived life was a lifestyle. Like I said, there was no, you weren't sitting on the couch all day. Okay. No, nobody, matter of fact, half the time they wouldn't even let you sit inside the house. You had to go outside. There was stuff to do. You had, depending on where you were, like, so you might have to go draw your water that you're going to be drinking, right? You had to go to a well, or you had to pump the water up. Your food, there was no grocery store in town. So you had to grow your food, right? So you had to go out there and, you got to feed the animals. You got to hold the garden. You got to pick whatever. You got to shell it, and then you got to put it up properly. So and all this stuff is exercise. It's all exercise. If when you carry a bucket to, to feed some animals, I mean, that's muscle. As a matter of fact, now they have a exercise called a farmer's carry, where you put weights in each hand and you walk with it. But why? Because that's building up your arms, it's building up your core. which is super important. So all that stuff is important. So yeah, so their life was lifestyle medicine, right? The food that they were eating was very natural. It was from the earth. Whether it was the plants or whether it was the animals that ate the plants that they had. So all that stuff was there. So like that was their lifestyle. So lifestyle is treatment and it is not extra credit. You need to think about lifestyle. So if you have, extra weight, if you have a diagnosis of hypertension, diabetes, even heart disease, you need to think of lifestyle as part of your treatment. So the same way you got all the medications sitting out there, you need to be envisioning, different components of your life as part of your treatment regimen. Okay. So, all right. So now that's, so the medication will help, but lifestyle really just, yeah, that multiplies the benefit. So what are we talking about? So, food, nutrition, you want to be culturally realistic. You know, a lot of times, especially in America, smaller portions is the first step. And yet again, I'm from the South. Okay. I'm used to the big plates. I'm used to the multiple plates. You eating, you going back two, three, four times to the pot to fill it in. So been there, grew up in it the whole 9 yards. And I understand what culturally, what that means. Because really it's not, it's not only are you like the food, but it also was a way to compliment the person that's cooking. So that is part of the culture. Understand that. Don't don't allow people to demean that. It's our culture, is what we do, and is what we've done. Now we have to understand, though, we get the knowledge and we know that, hey, we can't do that because we don't live like grandma. We don't live like grandpa. So we can't do that and continue to live, right? So we have to get smaller portions. If you go, the first step is small. It's the first step is smaller portions of traditional foods, okay? And then you can go into, all right, like I said, I'm only going to eat one plate. Okay, now I'm gonna eat a lot less of the more calorie dense elements of my food. All right, we're gonna cut that down a little bit, and then we're just gonna cut them smaller portions down, and then we're going to start, with more of the healthy stuff. And then at some point in time, then yeah, this extremely calorie dense food, you can alter that into stuff that's a lot less calorie dense. And so this is something you could do in order to make in order to improve the nutrition that you're getting. Okay. So you want smaller portions of your traditional foods, at least to start. You want more greens, more beans, more fiber. Okay. So fiber containing foods, that's huge. You really want to do that because it helps with the gut health. It helps you feel full. It is not, most of, fiber is not really absorbed. So it helps you to cut down on those calories. And then, like I said, it helps, with the bowel transit, the whole 9 yards. So more greens, more beans, more fiber. Okay. Less sugary drinks and processed foods. You want, what you really want to kind of get away from all that. Because one of the things, especially for those that are trying to lose weight, you know, you do not want to drink your calories, okay? You do not want to you want to get away from that. So the easiest switch for a lot of people is to get away from, the soft drinks and and really even some of the juices, depending on what you're drinking, and just drink water. Just drink water. Get a nice glass of water. So that's one thing you can do, okay? Because guess what? Water ain't got no calories. Water got no calories, and actually, it is kind of filling. So you can do that. So so less sugary drinks and processed food. Matter of fact, you want to get to processed foods you really kind of want to get them out. I mean, like I said, unless it's something specific you need, you want to kind of work those out of your diet, right? And then, remember, be mindful of cooking methods. So you got different cooking methods. So you got, baked, grilled, air fried. You want to avoid, deep frying your food. Why? Because oil is calorie dense. Okay. Oil is calorie dense. So you're going to eat more calories just because you took that piece of chicken, put some flour on it, and stuck it in a vat of oil. And like I said, seed oil, lard, whatever it is very calorie dense. So you want to start backing off of that, getting away from that, because that's going to help you as well. Okay. So nutrition is one thing, movement is another. And so movement is huge. And like I said, comparing to a grandpa and great grandma, they moved all the time. Why? Because it was just part of life. That was part of life. They didn't have many cars. Everything you did required movement. And so for us, we have to incorporate movement into our lifestyle. We have to bring that movement stuff into our culture. So you might want to go for a walk after your meal instead of going to veg out on the TV. You might want to go for a walk. You might want to do some chair exercises. Dancing. Hey, dancing is an exercise. You're out there moving, shaking, grooving, like I said, all that good stuff. Yeah, like I said, that is a great exercise. So don't let people make you think that you can't dance, all right? You can do some dancing, ballroom dancing, salsa, line dancing, all that stuff. Go out there, have some fun, okay? Do that stuff, all right? Then it's stuff like resistance bands. And then the other thing, there's a lot of, push-ups, wall sits, squats, things you can just do at home, even without a gym. So even without a gym, you can still get that exercise in there. But you do need consistency. You need to do something every day. Make sure you do something every day. So for those of you that like push-ups, you might want to do 10 push-ups every day, or 20 push-ups, or 30 push-ups, whatever your number is. And don't be afraid to start small. If you can only do one push-up, do one push-up. Do that one push-up every day for the next week, and then the next week go to 2 push-ups every day for the next week. Okay, so you want to make sure that stuff. The other thing, so they talked about nutrition, we talked about movement, sleep and stress. Do not underestimate the impact of sleep on your health. Okay. Everybody needs to get them some good rest. Okay. Like 7 to 8 hours, what we typically recommend. Get you some nice, solid sleep. Take the TV out of your room. Okay. Out of the bedroom. Take the TV out of the bedroom. When you go to the bedroom is for sleep. Okay. So make sure it's nice and neat. Cut the lights off, lay down, go to sleep. Okay, get you a nice, good night's sleep. And then chronic stress can elevate harmful hormones in your body. So you want to make sure you're avoiding that. And as Christians, as Christians, we have, you can read your Bible, or you can listen to your pastor, you know, we have a religion that tells you to take your stressor and give it to your God and to give it to your God. Okay. You're instructed. You're instructed not to worry. You're instructed not to stress. Oh, I'm losing, like I said, whatever's going on. Like I said, you're instructed to take that burden off your shoulders and to give it to your God said, I want your stress. Your God said, I want your stress. Okay. So you have to learn to do that. And the way that helps you to do that is through prayer. So we have develop a prayer habit, develop a habit of talking to God and getting that stress off your shoulders and pass it on to your guys. So for all the Christians, like I said, for all the Christians, this is what you're instructed to do. Now for everybody else, okay, everybody else. So okay, yeah, you can't leave out everybody else, but you do have meditation, breathing exercise, music, community involvements. All those things can kind of help you with stress. Okay. All right. So I think we went through step 1, then step 2, step 3, and I think we're coming to a close. Step 4, those are setting those SMART goals. And SMART goals, we're going to do this really quick. Specific goals that are specific, goals that are measurable, goals that are achievable, goals that are relevant, and goals that are time bound, what we call SMART goals. So if you look it up on Google, it's SMART, you're going to get those SMART goals. Set you some SMART goals, and that's going to help you get where you need to go. Okay. So as we kind of wrap up today, it's going to be, of course, I love that strong call to action. So one of the things I want you to do is make sure you get you a primary care clinician. Go get you a primary care clinician. Don't just say I'm feeling fine and I don't need nobody. You need to go get somebody, right? You need to go get somebody. So we want you to go get that type of stuff done. Get your numbers, write your numbers down, know what the numbers mean, and make sure that and if you have questions or anything of that nature, feel free to look up pressuremd.com, send us a message or call to the station, leave some messages out there, and let's kind of go from there. So we want to get a strong start to this 2026. We're going to get a strong start to this new year. Okay. And we're going to make a change in your life, and that way you can make a change in others' life. And so this is Health Facts, and my mission, Dr. Brown's mission, is to help you live longer and to help you live better. So that's what like I said, that's what we're here for. Health Facts, Pressure MD Academy, Dr. Brown, WVOE, everybody, all of us want you to live longer and want you to live better. So join us next week for another session. And as always, take charge of your health because no one else can do it for you. Thank you for tuning in, whether you're listening on WVOE, whether you're listening on Facebook Live, or whether you're watching a recording on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in, and we will chat with you again next week. Thank you very much.